As the Toronto Maple Leafs are gearing for a deep playoff push, a brand new report has revealed some interesting details, revealing that some major changes are planned for the Toronto Maple Leafs this offseason if they fail to make it past the first round. So I'm going to break down the shocking report and much more in this episode of Leafs Digest. But before we do, quick reminder, hit the subscribe button. About 80% of you who are watching are not subscribed. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you enjoy the daily Leafs content. Now, Darius, we made a video on this yesterday, something kind of similar to this, discussing our points. And then later on in that day yesterday, a pretty surprising report came out from The Athletic. And this is, there's a lot to unpack here, and Darius, I know you'll have a lot to say about this, but let's just start with the headline and its report. Maple Leafs ownership could make massive changes if really disappointing first-round exit happens again in the playoffs. And he basically says that pretty big changes could come inside the Maple Leafs organization if the team fails to get out of the first round. And there's a lot more to discuss here, but I'm just going to give your thoughts, or get your thoughts on this first. Again, we discussed it yesterday, how we expected this to happen, but a report came out from notable insiders in The Athletic saying that now, I guess disappointing first-round exit could be up for debate here, but I would assume if they lose in the first round in anything, maybe even besides 7 games, then you could see Sheldon Keefe go, you could see Shanahan go. Treliving is probably fine, but you never really know at this point. The ownership is pretty fed up, and this report reveals that as well.
Again, a lot of this is speculation, but we're just trying to piece things together based on what we're presented, right? And I think if the Leafs were to lose in the first round in any fashion, everyone, I say everyone, but Keefe and Shanahan will be gone. I do think that's the route they're going. The only person here I think whose job is safe is Treliving, because he just got here and he hasn't even gotten his fingerprints on this team. That's what's going to happen this summer, and it could be under somebody else. It's going to be very interesting this summer, especially the playoffs. The team holds the fate of the entire organization in their hands, because if they lose in the first round, there's going to be jobs that are lost here. It's just going to happen. I'm not entirely surprised. If you look at what Shanahan has put together, it's been impressive in the regular season, but they haven't been able to get the job done. And, James Myrtle's using words like pissed off, like MLSE is pissed off that they haven't been able to figure it out in the playoffs, stuff like that. It just hasn't gone well in the playoffs when it matters. Yes, they're putting together great regular seasons, and jersey sales and all this stuff are all up, and they have these great players. Austin Matthews is setting records, but what matters is winning the Stanley Cup, and they haven't really gotten past the first round in 20 years. I know they did last year, but again, they lose in 5 games, and it wasn't in a very good-looking fashion. It was pretty ugly. So again, if that happens this year, I'm not surprised. With expiring contracts coming up, Keefe, he was extended for 2 years, but I could see him gone after this season, depending what happens in the playoffs. And again, with Shanahan, with an expiring deal coming up, he hasn't, under his regime, the Leafs have not done much. It's just the truth.
Yeah, and let's get into some of the other ones here. You can see this from about a week ago from CEO of the MLSE, Keith Pelly, saying, "We're not afraid of change," and he's their new chief executive officer. And again, they're not afraid to make these quote-unquote big changes. And you can pause this and read all of this. He's basically saying the primary focus right now is the impact we can have in the city, the country, all the brands, including obviously the Toronto Maple Leafs among many other teams. But this is the big one here, and this is from the Athletics report. It says they lose in the first round, there's going to be pretty big changes, and there could be big changes this year and potentially even the year after. Shanahan's got the 1 year left on his deal. There's a new president, like we just discussed, of the MLSE, and there's a lot going on up at the top of the Leafs, and I know for a fact ownership is not happy at all with the performance of the team in the playoffs, and you just said it. They're pissed, and if there's another really disappointing first-round exit, they're going to want blood. He's using some crazy words here, but he says, and I don't know if just firing the coach is enough. I think they're going to want more than that. And again, Keefe probably would be the one to go. I think Shanahan would be the one to go. I don't think they're going to get rid of Brad Treliving this early unless they just go for a full clear out. But
that's exactly it. They could make the argument that, or some could make the argument that Treliving might not even survive this because he was hired by the current regime.
Yeah, which is even crazier, we think he's fine, but you never really know. I mean, if they're going to do a full clear of house, then, if they get swept in the first round, or I think if they lose in the first round, they're probably going to be, just even if they lose in 7 games, at some point you got to make some changes. And yeah, they could just do a complete clear. Maybe they trade some of their big players, which is another thing. Obviously, we're talking about this from like an ownership perspective, but they could trade. Obviously, they're not going to trade Matthews. They're probably not going to trade some of like Nylander, who just got signed. But you can make a case that maybe they trade Mitch Marner, maybe they trade some of the other guys and completely try to change things up here. But it's kind of this report revealed a lot of interesting details, and obviously this is stuff we speculated yesterday and somehow just managed to get confirmed that night. So maybe we should start making videos on that more, and we'll just get more reports confirming it. But it's a little bit scary if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs front office right now, if you are reading this report. And I'm sure they know about it internally. And it makes me wonder that I'm surprised they didn't go all in if they knew their job was going to be on the line.
Yeah, and I think the biggest monkey wrench in everything is a new CEO in MLSE, Keith Pelley. He just came in. I think he started on the job only last week. And so he said, we're not afraid of change. Like you mentioned in the article, we're not afraid of change. And he's going to come in and he's going to reevaluate everything. He's reevaluating TFC, everything that is under the MLSE banner. He's going to reevaluate. And when you look at the Leafs, under this current president, they haven't done anything since 2000, since he was hired, since 2014. They haven't done anything. And yes, they weren't great before that, but they haven't really made any noise since then either. I mean, if you look at the regular season stats, they're fantastic. Since he was hired, or in the last 10 years, they're 415, 273, and 92. Great record in the regular season. In the playoffs, they're 21 and 29. That's terrible. That is terrible. You would hope, especially with this roster, that you would see more success. And it's going to come down, like you said, to the roster as well. Because after the season, if they lose, like you said, if they lose in the first round, doesn't matter how, I could see a couple firings happening. I could see a couple people being let go. It doesn't matter how it happens. If it happens in the first round, I think that's what ends up happening. And then it's going to come down to the players too. And when you look at the contracts they just dished out and who is coming up, they could be moving away from Tavares once his contract expires at the end of next year. And Mitch Marner too. He might be the odd man out because you just locked up Nylander for another 8 years, right? So I think there's a possibility for a lot of changes to come if they do not succeed in this year's playoffs. At least push for a third round. If we don't see that, I don't know if the ownership is going to see the vision either, because nobody's been able to see it.
And let's look at some of the records now. You can see that the Toronto Maple Leafs are 21 and 29 in the playoffs since the ownership took over in 2016, 2017. You can kind of look at the playoff stats here, and I mean the Leafs. We all know the whole story of Leafs hockey for the past what seems like almost a decade now has been good regular season team for the most part, and then they crumble in the playoffs. Last year we thought maybe that would be different. They beat the Lightning, and then the same thing happened over and over again. And you look at their record between April 2020 or 2014 and 2024. So for the past decade, unbelievable record: 415, 273, and 92. You see John Tavares on the right there, but I mean, it hasn't led to anything at all. And you can almost make, I mean, this is not just the Toronto Maple Leafs thing. The Blue Jays are kind of been the same way since 2016. And a lot of, I mean, the Raptors are the only, I guess, exception because they obviously won the championship. But at some point, they're going to need to, and MLSE is obviously falls under a lot of things, not the Blue Jays, but a lot of other things. And at some point, they're going to have to make a change. And if it doesn't work out this season, or I guess this playoff run, which is in very, very soon, a couple weeks from now, we'll have an idea. I mean, the question then is what happens if they lose in the second round? I would say these changes are probably still going to happen because it's a second round exit. It's still not what they want. They want to at least push for a third round, and then maybe obviously a Stanley Cup is their goal. But I mean, a second round exit would be, I guess, in the middle somewhere. But I mean, a first round exit ultimately guarantees their fate. So any final thoughts?
I think what you want from the Leafs is, if they're not going to win the Stanley Cup, make the third round, play up to your potential, and look like you belong there. In the series last year against Florida, or to go back further, against Tampa, they went to war with Tampa and they finally won. And then you match up against Florida in the second round and the same thing happens. It looked like they weren't prepared. There was a mix of different things. It was terrible. It was ugly. You don't want that to happen again this year. And what it comes down to too, again, with the new CEO coming in, MLSE had like a changing of the guard around 2014-15, where they really made a push for all their teams to be competitive. And listen, every single team under the MLSE banner since 2015-ish won a championship in their league except for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So MLSE is really pushing for this to happen. And all the money is there, all the salaries wrapped up in these players, the roster is there. They just have to get it done. And if they don't and it's ugly again, a couple guys are going to pay for it.
And let's see what happens with that. It's going to be very interesting. I kind of just want to see what happens because the regular season is a regular season, and that's about over now. And Matthews might get 70, which is a very interesting point of discussion, which I'm sure we'll discuss in a video coming up once he probably inevitably hits it after the 2-goal game yesterday. But that'll wrap it up. Let's know what your thoughts are on all this. A pretty big report, a bit of a scary one if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs front office. Honestly, pretty encouraging if you're a fan, because at least you know at the very least, I guess you can have some solace in the fact that if they lose in the first round again, they'll have some big changes coming. That'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for watching. See you tomorrow.